Hello, my name is Sybil Gotch, and the reason behind this video is really just to give folks an introduction to the project in Costa Rica. So I'm recruiting an arborist team to help out on a scientific project that has recently been funded. And so I just wanted to give a little introduction to that project. The title is shown at the top of the screen, and it's looking at the relationship between climate change and the functioning canopy community and the functioning of the forest. And so I'll get into the details of the project in the following slides. So I'm the project director. I'm a professor of biology and environmental science at Franklin and Marshall College, and I have 3 collaborators on this project: Dr. Todd Dawson at Berkeley, Dr. Lauren Lohman at Wake Forest University, and Dr. Nalini Nadkarni at the University of Utah. And this project is a 4-year project funded by the National Science Foundation. We're just getting started with funding in September, and we're hoping to have the arborist crew work with us in the spring and summer of 2022. There we go. And so this project is focused on the tropical montane cloud forest. So first, just a little introduction about that forest type. These are highland forests in tropical regions, and they're frequently enshrouded in clouds or mist. So they have a very unique microclimate and a very unique vegetative composition as a result. For those of you who are from the Pacific Northwest, it looks pretty similar to the forest in the Olympic Peninsula, although there's a lot more vascular plants up in the canopy than you would expect in the Pacific Northwest. So tropical montane cloud forest is found all over the world. All the dots on these images, the blue dots, are areas of preserved tropical montane cloud forest. The red dots are areas where you have microclimate that would support tropical montane cloud forests, but these areas are experiencing or have experienced deforestation. So while they are all over the world, they are restricted in area to these highland mountain regions. And overall, only 1.4% of all of tropical forests are these types of forests. So you might think, why are tropical montane cloud forests so worth studying? And the reason why they're so worth studying and conserving is that, there's 2 reasons. One is biodiversity. So they have an incredibly high biodiversity, and all the numbers that you see on this slide are just species that are found in one small reserve where I work in the Monteverde Reserve of Monteverde Cloud Forest Reserve, 3,000 species of vascular plants, and you can see down below 800 species of vascular epiphytes. That's the group that we work with. These are plants that live on top of other plants high in the canopy. And many of these species and the animal and bird species that are in this ecosystem are endemic, meaning they're not found anywhere else. So from a biodiversity perspective, this is a very important forest to study and to preserve. Now, the tropical montane cloud forest is also very important because of its role in the water cycle. What do I mean by that? Well, the tropical montane cloud forest basically produces water. It's able to strip water out of the clouds, and that's what's called cloud water interception. Infiltration refers to the rate of flow down through the soil, and infiltration rates are quite high in the tropical montane cloud forest, meaning that the soils can hold a lot of water as well. So the above ground biomass can hold a lot of water, the trees and those epiphytes, and also the soils can as well. And these 2 things together buffer stormwater losses. So it means that when you have a big storm, the impact on the environment is less and more water is held in the environment. That's really important because it provides water in the dry season. So we have evidence that in areas where forests have been converted to pastures, there's a decreased stream flow in the dry season. So it alters the hydrologic cycle, decreasing water resources for both wildlife and humans. And so this is a conceptual model that sort of summarizes these effects. We have on the left-hand side cloud forest, on the right-hand side pasture or grassland, and each arrow represents a different component of the water cycle. And what you can see is that some of the arrows disappear completely when the forest is converted to pasture, namely horizontal precipitation, which is not pictured here. That's because there's no vegetation to capture and strip that water out of the cloud, and then less of that water gets into the soil. And in the dry season, you have a reduction in flow rates throughout the watershed. So the forest is important in maintaining the health of the hydrology of the system. Now, in addition, the tropical montane cloud forest is important because it stabilizes the landscape. So in many areas where you have high deforestation rates. You also have high rates of landslides, which is what you see in this image on the left-hand side. So the montane cloud forest is important for diversity, for hydrology, and also just for maintaining the stability of the landscape. And so with climate change, what is happening in the cloud forest? Well, we know that climate change is causing increases in temperature and decreases in dry season rainfall. So there is an idea that we're going to have a loss in the tropical montane cloud forest ecosystem. But what's going to happen, there are all sorts of sort of mini ecotones or mini ecosystems that are throughout this region. And the idea, or the sort of leading hypothesis, is that with the increases in temperature, and we also are having an increase in the elevation of the cloud formation. So where those clouds are actually forming on the mountainside, the elevation is moving up. And we also have increases in drought periods. So what will happen with those, it is thought, is that we will have an increase in the, sorry, that was my cat freaking out. We'll have an increase at the elevation of each of these ecotones. So where we have pre-montane cloud forest currently, that will move up the mountainside. But what happens where we currently have cloud forest? Well, one hypothesis is that the cloud forest will be displaced by vegetation from lower down, and then it will no longer exist. But we really don't know how the cloud forest will be changing. And we really don't know, though we can hypothesize on how that will affect the water cycle. Now, when we think about how the forest impacts the water cycle, we can't do that from the ground. So like my students and my collaborator Arborists and I do often, we walk up to a tree, we throw a line in the tree, or more often with a big shot put a line in the tree, and then we climb to the top of the tree. And this is what it looks like when we climb these tropical montane cloud forest trees. There's an enormous amount of biomass. Everything here in the foreground of this image, these are all epiphytes. These are vascular epiphytes that are on the surface of the branch. You can't even see the branch anymore. So these are really, really loaded with epiphytes, these mature forest trees. And these epiphytes are very diverse, and they also have a variety of functional groups. There are shrubs and treelets that live up in these trees. It's not just, as I mentioned earlier, bryophytes or mosses. So one of the big and driving questions in my research group is trying to understand the importance of epiphytes for ecosystem function. We've been working to understand which epiphytes are more and less vulnerable to climate change over the last 8 years, and now we really want to understand more concretely the role that these plants play in ecosystem function. So where are we working? So we're down in Costa Rica, Central American Isthmus, and Costa Rica has a sort of a backbone of mountains that run halfway through it, and we're in the middle of the country here in the Monteverde region. I've been working in many sites at a variety of elevations, but for this particular project, we're going to be working in the wettest areas that have the highest biodiversity and biomass of epiphytes. And this is just to give you a sense of what it really looks like up there. I keep showing pictures because it's really hard to explain what it looks like, so I try and do that with imagery. And just to give you a sense of the coverage of the plants on the trees and also the different types of plants that are in this community. Again, another image just highlighting that we have little trees growing on trees. There are lots of orchids, bromeliads, and other things up there as well. It's a really beautiful place to work. So the goal for this current project is to understand feedbacks between changes in the epiphyte community composition, and we know with these changes in climate that some epiphytes are going to be vulnerable. So the question is, with a loss of the epiphyte community, how will that impact the microclimate of the canopy, the physiology of the tree that the epiphytes were living on, and the water cycling of the whole forest? And so this is how we're sort of envisioning that we will expect to see with decreases in epiphyte abundance, changes in the canopy microclimate, namely increases in exposure will cause the canopy to get warmer, drier, more exposed, more wind, more solar radiation. That then will impact the physiology of the host tree, probably impacting the water cycle and the photosynthetic function of the host tree, and that host tree, if you scale up on the level of the forest, can impact canopy water cycling in the whole cloud forest, which can then impact the hydrologic function or the water cycle of the region. Okay, so we're not just, though, thinking about how a loss in epiphytes due to climate change are going to be affecting the water cycle in the forest, because this landscape it's like a quilt. There's not just forest, there's forest and pasture. So we'll be doing this project not only in forest, but in adjacent pasture areas in mature trees as well. So last year, my research assistant and I conducted a pilot study just on 2 trees, and I have a couple images of that work just to give you a sense of what we're doing. So here I am moving my way out laterally to the tips of the tree, and we removed as much as 80% of the epiphyte matter from the tree. So you can really see the stark difference of what it looks like in the background here, where I haven't yet done any removals, and here in the foreground where I've stripped everything off of this branch. And you'll notice that there are mats. So I mean, I'm basically taking a handsaw and cutting through about 60 centimeters or so of the mat and then lowering it to the ground. So very intensive campaign here. And this is also just some more imagery to give you a sense of what it looks like up there. So this is the tree after, or we were almost done on the stripping on this one branch. And Kaylor, my field assistant, is working now on this lower branch. So you can get a sense of how different it is here where my friend Emily is sitting, and here below where we haven't started the stripping. And then also just another image to give you a sense of how thick the epiphytic matter is up there. This is a cross section as I was cutting lengthwise. So this is like 50 centimeters deep of soil and roots. Here's a huge lateral stem or root from a shrub. So there's a lot of material up there and a lot of material that will need to be removed for this study. So in this study, we will need to strip epiphytes from all of the trees and then instrument them with microclimate sensors and physiologic sensors and other sensors that measure components of the water cycle. And this is a summary of our hypotheses. I'm not going to go into that just so I don't make this video so long, but if anybody's interested in learning more about the science behind the project, I'd be happy to talk with people. So here's basically what we're proposing to do. So we propose to have 4 or 5 forest pairs and 5 pasture pairs. One of the trees will be an intact control, and the other tree we will strip all of the epiphytes from. And I say all of the epiphytes, I figured it's about 75 to 80% that you can safely remove without it becoming dangerous to the crew. So we'll do as much as we can while obviously working safely. In addition to the stripping of the trees, we have to install a number of sensors. So in each of the canopy trees, regardless of whether it is the treatment tree or the control, we have to install 28 sensors. So some of those are microclimate sensors like air temperature and relative humidity. Some of them are to measure water flow through the trees, and other are to measure the change in the direction of the flow down to the forest floor. And there also will be ground sensors that we have to install to measure changes in soil moisture or how the water is falling to the forest floor. So there's a lot of sensors also that need to be installed in all of these trees after the stripping is done. These are just some images of what this kind of instrumentation looks like. The sap flow sensors that we're putting in on epiphytes are going to look a little different, but in the end it kind of looks like a Christmas tree where we have tons and tons of sensors all throughout the tree measuring the pulse not only of the tree itself, but the air surrounding the tree and the soil below it. So what will the arborist team actually do? So as I mentioned prior, they will help us remove as much of the epiphyte cover that we can from the 5 forest and the 5 pasture trees and safely lower that material to the ground. It really pains us to have to do something so destructive, and so we are planning to use all of that or as much of that epiphyte material as possible to run our education program, which is actually a very substantial part of this project, where we will be installing small shade houses in a number of schools and hotels and other locations in the area, and we'll be providing curriculum to go along with those shade houses and epiphytes so that students and locals can learn about the importance of the epiphyte community to the forest function. So then after we do the removals of the material, we'll install the microclimate and sap flow sensors. And then for whoever's going to be with us at the end of the campaign, we have proposed a climbing course for the community. So whatever crew is there towards the end will help out with that. So what is it that we are offering? So the time frame is not set in stone yet, but I'm looking at approximately a 2-month window for this work between May 15th and July 15th. It could move a little earlier or a little later depending on the schedule of folks involved, but that's the idea. And we're asking for a minimum commitment of 2 to 3 weeks. But if we have candidates that can stay a lot longer, we will certainly prioritize them. It's easier for us on the logistics end and in terms of training and getting people up to speed and learning how to work in this group. It's easier to have people that are staying longer. And then in terms of compensation, obviously as a scientific program, we can't pay as much as what an arborist would normally make. But we will cover airfare, housing, and food, and we'll be paying a 150-day stipend to anybody who can participate. I am certainly available if any interested parties have questions, either about the science or the logistics or what it's like to live in Monteverde or who else will be involved in the project. I'm happy to answer any of those questions, and you can find my email on my website. I hope you can join our team. Take care. Thanks.